Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
I'm on my way, Bernardo. You're probably having a good time there even without me, aren't you? Said a tall, broad-shouldered, freckled man over the phone. Antonio was just like a character from an old children's cartoon. His name was fitting, his hair was red, and he had freckles. The full set. However, Antonio was already in his 40s, and he had a very serious job. He was a top-notch surgeon at a good private medical center. Spring was cold, but the rays of the sun started to warm in May. Antonio Soto won rock, paper, scissors against his colleague, an excellent way to draw lots, and he got these weekends. And now, happy with himself and life, he rushed to his friend's country house in his SUV. The trees along the edge of the road seemed simply huge. They alternately blocked and opened the sun. It was a bit hot, but the air conditioning was on in the car. The weather breathed joy, youth, and happiness. Antonio smiled. He had been doing this frequently in recent years. His life had been tough. He spent his childhood in an orphanage. A small, sick, and unwanted boy. Nobody adopted him. The only friend he made in the orphanage, Lorenzo, was placed in a foster family at the age of 14. And after that, Antonio was completely alone in the whole wide world. It was so difficult that it couldn't be put into words. He didn't remember his childhood at all. He locked those memories in a drawer and threw away the key. It was as if there had never been any childhood. At the age of 23, right after medical college, Antonio joined the army. By that time, all of his childhood illnesses had gone away on their own. He had nothing to lose and was happy to serve in the army. There he met his childhood friend Lorenzo again. It wasn't so bad. Even during the war, where they ended up together, it wasn't so scary for them both. Anything could happen, but it was never worse than in the orphanage, not for him anymore. Their friendship was real, pure. They stood by each other through bullets, fire, and water. However, Antonio suffered a serious injury, spent a year in hospitals, and then met a good doctor who helped him not only recover but also inspired him to go to the university. Medicine was his passion. In the hot spot, Antonio was a medic, saving soldiers. And then the soldiers saved him. But now, it's all in the past. Civilian life, like an eraser, wiped away all the negative memories. 6 more years of study and medical residency had passed. And now, a brilliant specialist with golden hands, molded by God himself, was recruited from an ordinary clinic to a private one. Here, fame caught up with its hero. Patients from other cities began to come to Antonio. And he helped everyone, even those who couldn't afford treatment. The director of the private medical center tried to control the altruist, but Antonio honestly spoke his mind. Do you not like that I sometimes see patients without payment? Fire me. I took an oath to help people. You can't make me dance to your tune. It's not up to you to tell me who to treat and who not to, understand? I came here because you begged me. You pay me, and I bring you profit. On my own time, I'll sometimes see patients for free because they asked me to. Your clinic is already making a lot of money thanks to me. Don't teach me how to live or work. Antonio left, leaving the door open, and the boss, who was older on 10 years, just watched him go. And he never bothered him with such kind of questions again. The sun was setting, and the village was a few kilometers away. On the road, in a completely deserted place, Antonio saw a girl. She was beautiful, slim, and had a pile of papers in her hands. Can I give you a lift? He asked. The girl had short, dark hair that reached her shoulders and was wearing a simple sundress. The sun was mercilessly scorching, as if it wasn't going to set for another couple of hours. Yes, please. I was hitchhiking and thought I would leave quickly. But I've been walking around here for 3 hours now. I would have walked to the village by myself soon. Can you take me to the crossroads? She replied. Antonio nodded. Near an elite village, where there was even a security checkpoint at the entrance, there was another old village where his companion was heading. She got into the car, and the engine roared. The girl relaxed. It became cool and comfortable. Out of the corner of his eye, Antonio noticed that she had papers indicating an analysis for pregnancy hormones. "What month of pregnancy are you in?" he asked. "I'm in my 3rd month." "How did you know?" "My belly is still very small," the hitchhiker replied. "I'm a doctor." "Your face is very pale, and the documents say you're pregnant. Why isn't the father of the child helping you get there? How can a pregnant woman walk around the road alone in the heat for hours?" Antonio frowned. "I'm a widow. My husband was a soldier. He died a month ago." The girl hesitated. "The funeral, everything. I didn't realize I was pregnant right away. I just found out that I'm having twins." Antonio whistled. "I'm sorry for your loss. And congratulations. And sorry again. I don't know how to react. You know what? I'll give you a ride home. You've had a tough day." "It's not necessary." "It is necessary. I was a soldier too. Consider it my tribute to your late husband." They struck up a conversation. The girl's name was Christina. She talked about her late husband, who had also been in the military and served in other hotspots. And now, here he was, killed during training, a simple accident. Who would have thought? When Antonio approached the village, his friend called again. "We already got the meat. We're about to barbecue. Are you walking on feet or something?" His friend exclaimed. "I'm on my way. Just leave me some pork. I'll grill it myself. I can't trust you guys." He joked. The car turned onto a dirt road, drove past some fields, and stopped next to a small rundown hut. Christina pointed out which way to turn to get to her house. "Thank you so much," the girl said, handing Antonio some money. Antonio frowned. "Are you crazy? Take the money back. I'd happy if you gave me some water instead." "I'm thirsty," he said. "Okay, come with me." She led Antonio into the hallway. Inside, the ceilings were low, but the girl could stand there at her full height. The little house was tiny, the roof apparently leaked, as in the corridor, in the middle, there was a basin for collecting rainwater. "Oh my God, how do you live here? How will you manage with a child here? With 2 kids? There's probably no heating here. But we can heat with firewood." Christina handed her guest a large mug of water, and Antonio gulped it down greedily. "And who will chop wood for you?" "You know, I don't really have a choice." The girl began to get nervous. Antonio realized that he was being uncivilized and was already about to leave, but his attention was drawn to a photograph on the wall in a black frame with a corner. He walked over to the portrait without asking for permission. He rubbed his eyes. "It can't be." He swore harshly and stood frozen near the photo. Christina stood a little way off with an empty mug, looking at her guest not understanding, and he stood by the photo, leaning against the wall and crying. "You knew my husband?" She understood. "I did." Antonio wiped away his tears, just like when he was little, and would smear them all over his cheeks. The young man in military uniform on the photo was smiling, and it was painfully familiar. He was the closest person to him in the whole wide world. "That's Lorenzo." "Oh my God, how did he die?" "I was just thinking yesterday that he hadn't called me in a while," Antonio said, not taking his eyes off the photo. At that moment, Antonio's phone rang in his pocket. It was Bernardo again. "I'm not coming." Antonio barked into the phone and pressed the red button several times in a row. The phone obediently turned off. Christina looked up with teary eyes. His parachute didn't open. "They had a training," she said. Antonio cursed again. He apologized and then went back to looking at the photo. "Where is he buried?" he asked, not taking his eyes off the photo. Christina told him how to get to the local cemetery, and Antonio left. Half an hour later, he was standing at his friend's grave, whom he thought was still alive. There was no monument, only a little plate with his name. How could this happen? How could this happen? Why didn't you leave? I called you. I asked you to start a civilian life. Fool. What a fool you are. You're going to have twins, bro. I saw your wife. He couldn't even imagine, as he went to visit friends at their country house, that he would end up at the grave of his fellow soldier and best friend. He spent several hours at the cemetery until it got dark. He realized that he didn't know how to leave and couldn't find the road, so he returned to the village, to Christina. Excuse me, please. I can't find the way. I tried to leave, but somehow ended up in the village again. Could you please show me how to get to the highway? Antonio felt embarrassed. He was tired and wanted to drink again. Well, there are only dirt roads here. If you don't know them, they will lead you back to the village. Besides, it's already dark. Stay overnight. You've been at the cemetery all this time? Christina asked. Antonio nodded. He felt awkward staying, but he really wanted to talk to her, to tell her about his friendship with Lorenzo. And so Antonio stayed. Christina served him a delicious dinner. It was a simple soup, but Antonio loved homemade food. It seemed like an incredible delicacy to him. Instead of restaurants and diners, he preferred a small cafeteria near the hospital. Trinidad, a wonderful woman and mother of 3 children, cooked there. Antonio would come to her every day for lunch. Sometimes even on weekends. The cook knew him by face and name, and they became friends. We were in the same orphanage with Lorenzo. Antonio began the conversation. They were sitting at a table, drinking tea. The wind was howling outside, and the weather was getting worse. The rain should have poured yesterday, but the clouds apparently arrived late. I had no idea that you were the Antonio he spoke so highly of. He said you were the only family he had. We got married quietly, without a big celebration, and we planned to have a wedding when Lorenzo returned from his military exercise. He said he would invite you. A heartbreaking silence fell once again. Antonio stood up from the table, walked to the wall, and grabbed his hair. He desperately wanted to scream, but he was afraid of scaring his friend's pregnant wife. Oh my God, I can't believe it. I've never lost anyone in my life. Because, essentially, I had no one. Christina looked up at the guest. Antonio was standing next to a photograph, as if he would be closer to Lorenzo that way. Pain, sorrow, and denial gnawed at his soul. Grief weighed on his chest like a heavy stone. But you were married. Christina had heard a lot about Antonio from her husband. She felt like she had known him for a long time. Yes, I was. But we divorced almost immediately. I had an injury after my service, and I couldn't get a decent job because of it. I also went to medical school. But she needed money. And I wasn't making much as a student. Plus, I had to provide for myself. In the end, I finished medical school and went to work in a hospital. That's how I became a surgeon. He used to call you redhead. Antonio nervously chuckled, trying not to cry. That's what they called me in the orphanage. I am a redhead, you see. Lorenzo was a year younger than me, and I used to protect him. And he helped me come up with funny nicknames for the other kids. We were a team against the whole world. They talked until midnight. Christina started yawning, and Antonio ordered her to go to sleep. There was a spare room in the house with an old squeaky bed. It had a thin mattress, a blanket, and a pillow. And that was more than enough for Antonio, who had to sleep on the wooden floor of the barracks during the war, on the grass, and in the field. So, these conditions were paradise for him. He saw Lorenzo in a dream that night. Of course, Antonio didn't believe in contact with the dead. He understood that it was just his subconsciousness. He thought about him, and his brain continued the theme when his body shut down. He woke up earlier than Christina in the morning. He lay there, staring at the ceiling. As soon as he opened his eyes, pain pierced his body. He remembered that he had found out about his childhood friend's death yesterday. Orphans don't have parents, they have no one but friends and caregivers. Lorenzo was the closest to him. Somehow, in recent years, they had hardly met, but they regularly called each other once or twice a month, for sure. And then Lorenzo stopped calling, and Antonio himself was constantly busy. Work, home, he just got officially divorced. His ex-wife left him for someone else. Remembering how he caught her with someone else, Antonio still felt like an idiot. He had suspected it for a long time, but he preferred to trust her. After all, she had never lied to him. Not once. Only cheated for a few years. Even the neighbor hinted to him, but each time Elena found a way out, found simple and logical explanations. And he believed her for so many years and was a husband whose wife was cheating on him. Lying in a fragile house early in the morning, Antonio remembered the day he decided to surprise his wife. It was their 4th wedding anniversary. He pretended to forget about their anniversary in the morning, took a day off work, bought his wife an expensive bracelet, flowers, and ordered food at a restaurant. He came home, quietly opened the door with a key, and heard his wife's words coming from the bedroom. "That idiot doesn't even realize how cool I'm spending our anniversary. I bet he doesn't even remember it. He's completely crazy about his medicine. You know, I'm starting to hate him. He's here, but he doesn't notice me at all. I want to be with you," she said. Antonio appeared in the doorway. His wife was lying in their bed with some brunette guy. When they saw him, they were scared, and his wife shyly pulled the blanket over herself, as in a cheap movie. "You don't have to cover up. What haven't we seen there, right?" He nodded to the guy who was lying in his bed. The guy was confused and nodded. Antonio understood that his wife's lover was scared to death. He probably knew he was sleeping with a military man and thought that now her husband would start smashing everything. "Antonio," he extended his hand to the uninvited guest in his bed. The guest shyly extended his hand. "David." "Nice to meet you, David. How long have you been sleeping with my wife?" asked Antonio, as if he was talking about the weather. The guy in the bed nodded, then shook his head in fear and looked pleadingly at the stout military man who knew how to kill and killed people every day at work. "I see. What do you think of her?" Meanwhile, the man started getting dressed, muttering an apology. Antonio looked at his wife, who also started getting dressed. "Your underwear is over there in the corner," Antonio said. "What kind of a man are you? You could at least make a scene." Elena blurted out. She was a beautiful blonde, slender, and a former gymnast whose career ended due to an injury. Now she worked as a coach at an Olympic reserve school. "And who are you to fight for?" Antonio asked. He was already amused. Of course, he had very conflicting feelings, but he chose to put on a mask of indifference. He thought it would hurt her more that way. And he was not wrong. "I'm your wife," Elena screamed. "Ex-wife. From this moment on, you're my ex-wife. By the way, I wish you happiness and hope you both will have children. We couldn't have children in 4 years, but maybe you'll have more luck. I'm gonna go to the kitchen. I'll make tea. And I'm not inviting you, sorry. Elena, I think you should pack your things. The essentials. Come back tomorrow from 8 to 5 for the rest, while I'm at work. Take everything you consider yours. You can even tear off the wallpaper. And the day after tomorrow, I'll change the lock on the door and file for divorce myself," Antonio said matter-of-factly, as if he was talking about something ordinary. He calmly went to the kitchen, put the flowers in a vase, unpacked the food from the restaurant, and cut the cake. When the door slammed in the hallway, he opened the champagne and celebrated the beginning of his new life. Divorce turned out to be easy, as if he was getting rid of something unnecessary. Perhaps it was his wounded pride and his wife's betrayal, but Antonio never argued with her. When she called about the divorce, he spoke to her as usual. It infuriated her, but Antonio didn't care anymore. Now, lying in his best friend's widow's house, this story was easy to remember with a smile. When Antonio told Lorenzo about it, he listened to him laughing for a long time. Now he remembered that it was their last conversation. Yes, Lorenzo said then that everything was for the best and that he would meet another normal woman who wouldn't cheat on him. He knew how to support his friend. He said he was going to get married because he had fallen madly in love. He said he would definitely invite him to visit. And then, apparently, everything was in a hurry. They got married quickly and postponed the wedding celebration until the end of the military exercises. And after the exercises, a slain soldier arrived from the hot zone. Only now did it occur to Antonio that Lorenzo had parents. Yes, adoptive, but he spoke well of them. So why weren't they here? Why was his wife living in this dump? Lorenzo should have had a home. When Christina quietly walked past him, Antonio followed her. I didn't want to wake you up. I woke up at dawn, he said. It's okay, Christina smiled. Her short hair was a little bit in a mess, but it suited her. Let me help you. Maybe I can make breakfast. Is that okay? As Antonio made the scrambled egg, he asked her about Lorenzo's adoptive parents. It turned out that there were other children from orphanages in his adoptive family. After Lorenzo left to serve in the army, his mother adopted twins. And one of them broke his spine and became disabled. Since they adopted him, Lorenzo did not receive anything from the state. And he spent all his savings on the boy's surgery and rehabilitation. Thanks to Lorenzo, the boy started moving his fingers. He still couldn't walk, but the worst was over, and he was recovering. Of course, Christina couldn't ask to come to their apartment. There were 4 of them, and the apartment had only 3 rooms. Lorenzo's adoptive mother invited her over, but Christina politely refused. They sometimes talked on the phone, but that was it. She didn't expect any financial help from them either. They needed money for the boy's further rehabilitation, and he was only 15. Lorenzo didn't tell me about this. It all happened 6 months ago. You know, we were living here, at my place. He saved up money for a flat, but it all went towards the boy's treatment. That was more important. My parents left me this house as an inheritance. They lived here and both died. I was a late child. My mother was 47 and my father was over 50 when I was born. My dad died when I was 10, and my mom passed away when I entered university. I was 19. I dropped out to studies and started working. I don't have any siblings. Distant relatives aren't really interested in me, so I'm alone. I'm used to it. I've been used to taking care of my mom since I was a kid and helping her. I'll take care of myself. If necessary, I'll even give birth and raise children on my own. I won't give them up. You don't need to worry about me. And don't look at me with such pity. I'm doing fine. This is how I live. Of course, it was better with Lorenzo, but now he's gone, and I'm still here. And I have a task, to raise our children and give education to them. It's a blessing. I'm happy about it. Antonio looked embarrassed. Am I really looking at you with pity? He asked, swallowing his omelet. You're looking at me like I'm a kitten caught in the rain, Christina replied. Sorry, I didn't mean it. You know, I'm like that too. I never accept pity from others. Let them feel sorry for themselves, but I'm doing fine. But one thought just came to my mind, and I have to tell you. Christina looked him in the eyes. The red-haired guest put down his fork, looked at her completely seriously, and said, You should move in with me. Christina chuckled and continued eating, not even responding to his question. What a character, Antonio thought. You're not even going to answer? He asked. I won't even answer that. What a nonsense. I'm a widow. I don't need romance. I'm expecting a child from my husband, and I'll be faithful to him. No, I know you didn't mean that, but I still won't agree to it. Antonio lowered his eyes and shook his head. Of course, that's not what I meant. You're my friend's widow. You know, my wife cheated on me for several years. And you're going to remain faithful to someone who's no longer alive. Women are so different. Lorenzo was right when he chose you. But I'll still give you my phone number. If you change your mind, I'll come and get you anytime. Your house is old, and you can't chop wood. Antonio was nervous. How could he help her? It was his sacred duty. A tribute to Lorenzo's memory. She was carrying Lorenzo's child, his only close relative. He didn't even want to leave her. But he had to go back to the city. He had an appointment at the clinic after lunch. He looked out the window. The sun disappeared behind the clouds. The wind picked up. I won't come and live with you, but if you want to help, come over. I really need help around the house. And we need to chop wood for the winter. Lorenzo stocked up, and there's still a little left, but it won't be enough. I'll come. I'll come this weekend. And I'll help. I'll be at your disposal. Soon, Antonio was driving on the highway towards the city. He turned on his phone, and there were dozens of missed calls from friends. Messages from Bernardo, whom he yelled at yesterday. He regretted it. Of course, he would have to explain himself. The weather was getting worse. When Antonio approached the city, a disaster began like in a movie. The hurricane wind was carrying off the small birds and packets, pouring rain, visibility was rapidly deteriorating. Suddenly, Antonio thought he saw Lorenzo on the roadside in the rain. He hit the brakes. He jumped out of the car straight into the rain. No one was there. The sidewalk was empty. But I saw you. Bro, what do you want to tell me? Whispered a soap through Antonio. It became cold. He got into his car, and in that moment, 150 meters away, the wire fell with the wind. It started sparking, shimmering, and reflecting off the road. If Antonio hadn't stopped, he could have ended up there. He would have been electrocuted. Antonio sat for a long time, afraid to move from his spot. Thank you, bro, he finally uttered. Antonio didn't believe that this could happen. But he desperately wanted to believe. It couldn't be a lie. He saw him suddenly, but who would believe him if he told them? Antonio hit the gas, turned the car around, and drove home a different way. Soon, he was already home. Clothes were tumbling in the washing machine like on a carousel. The kettle was boiling on the stove. Antonio walked around the house in his underwear, preparing to take a warm bath. He was trying to remember what was left in the fridge when the phone rang. Bernardo, of course. He would demand an explanation for his yesterday's antics. Antonio picked up the phone. The number was unfamiliar to him. The second thought that came to his mind was a patient. Hello, came the voice on the other end of the line. He immediately knew who was calling him. Christina? Is it you? How are you? Antonio exclaimed happily. Everything is fine. Well, actually, no. Everything is bad. Antonio, I have to take you up on your offer if it's still valid. You want to move in with me? He clarified. If you can, take me far away, please. Right now. Antonio didn't need to be asked twice. I'm coming, he said into the phone. He turned off the kettle, grabbed some clean clothes, and ran out into the entrance. Christina was the last thread connecting him to his friend. And she was pregnant from Lorenzo. How strange it all was. He couldn't believe it. It takes much more time to come to terms with loss. But even now he understood that he would take care of her. Christina was a close person to him, and he wouldn't allow her to need anything. Fortunately, she agreed to stay with him. Antonio thought about buying her an apartment in the city. Or if she wanted, a house in the countryside. Now it was his sacred duty. The most important task. It was a tribute to memory, it was all he could still do for Lorenzo. And perhaps he would need to go to his family to see the boy who broke his spine. Why didn't Lorenzo turn to him if he's a surgeon? There were so many questions, and only this fragile girl with short hair like a teenager could answer them now. She was strong in spirit. but still weak and vulnerable. When Antonio arrived at her house, he was engulfed in sticky fear for the second time that day. The roof of the house had collapsed. Now it was a full-fledged old ruin. "Christina!" Antonio ran out onto the street, calling her. But no one answered. And now, how to understand whether this happened before or after her call? He climbed inside, pushing through fallen wooden beams. He called her, shouted. It was scary. What if she was gone too? No, he couldn't even think about it. The last thread of connection with Lorenzo couldn't just snap like that. Antonio. He heard from behind. The voice came from the direction of the yard. Antonio hurried to the exit and stepped out onto the porch. Are you okay? When did this happen? He asked. She stood there in dry clothes, looking clean. Apparently, the roof didn't fall on her head. I was at the neighbor's. The roof collapsed in the hurricane a couple of hours ago. You left, and it collapsed an hour later. I'm okay. But now I have nowhere to live, Christina shrugged. She had already resigned herself to the fact that she would have to overcome herself and live with someone else for a while. At her request, Antonio climbed back inside and helped her carry out all the things she needed: documents, clothes, phone charger, photos of her husband, and a box of photo albums. Some stuff that was precious to her heart. She left the rest in the shed at the neighbor's for safekeeping. How little we really need of truly important things. They drove in silence. The rain was dripping. Antonio couldn't shake the feeling that everything was happening as it should. As if he could physically touch his deceased friend again. As if Christina was supposed to be in that car. Nothing is accidental. What if yesterday he decided to go out of town not just because? What if Christina not accidentally ended up there, on that road? And no one picked her up earlier. Neither an hour earlier nor an hour later. Everything was on time. And he gave her a ride. And got to know who she was. Could all of this really be accidental? And what about what happened on the road today? He saw Lorenzo, and then his ghost vanished into thin air. And a cable fell. But not on his car, because he braked. So many coincidences and chances. What if accidents are not accidental? And what if, going further in his thoughts, their meeting with Lorenzo at the orphanage, their friendship, were all meant to lead to this? And now the girl sitting in the back seat of his car is here for a reason? Antonio, Christina interrupted his thoughts while they were going. What is it? Antonio caught her gaze in the rearview mirror. Something terrible, something strange happened today. You know, I heard his voice. It was raining, and suddenly I heard Lorenzo's voice. We didn't see his body, the coffin was closed. And in my heart, there was still hope that they all made a mistake and he was alive. I ran out to the yard, heard him calling my name again. The voice was coming from the backyard. I ran, opened the gate, but there was no one there. Just the field. I cried. And at that moment, the roof of the house fell. I think he saved me. You probably think I'm crazy? She asked timidly. On the contrary. I'm as crazy as you are. I was driving in the rain and saw him. I braked, got out. I honestly saw him alive. I don't believe in these things, but how can you not believe when it happens to you? How can you ignore it? My life has turned upside down in the last 2 days. It won't be the same anymore. And the best thing about it is that you agreed to move. It will give me peace of mind. You know, I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything. Consider me Lorenzo's brother. Not by blood, but in fact, you understand? He's my little brother. And I will take care of his children as if they were my own nephews. Okay? Christina nodded. His words made it a little easier. She wasn't used to asking for help, let alone receiving it. They arrived at a nice multi-story building. The walls were sturdy, and neighbors' quarrels were inaudible. The view from the window was stunning, overlooking the park. Christina would live in the second room, in the guest room. Antonio prepared dinner for her and then went to take a shower. In the evening, the man began to feel that he caught a cold. "I know a good remedy. You have everything for it in your kitchen. Shall I make it?" Christina asked, noticing that Antonio wasn't feeling well. "Please, if it doesn't bother you. I think I got soaked in the rain." Christina made a good herbal tea with honey and added a pinch of baking soda. Antonio drank it and soon fell asleep, but she couldn't sleep. She stood by the window, thinking about what brought her here. How did she end up here? Did Lorenzo have to die for her to be here? She recalled their last meeting. She wanted to cry, but held back her emotions. She couldn't cry. Children feel everything. She has 2 children now. 2. She can't afford to be weak. Besides, tears always gave her a heavy feeling in the bottom of her stomach. It's harmful. She couldn't allow that. No, she couldn't. She will protect and save her children at any cost. And crying is useless. How would it help? He's gone, and even an ocean of tears won't bring him back to life. Antonio left for work while Christina was still asleep. He was pleased that someone was in the house again. He never liked living alone. Of course, it was different before, but after he met Elena, he almost immediately convinced her to move in with him. He needed someone's presence in the house. He had enough loneliness in his life. The orphanage was crowded, and he wanted solitude. But when he started living alone, he realized he didn't know how to do it. He managed with the household chores, but the silence was killing him, cutting him without a knife. In the last 2 months, after he kicked his wife out with her lover, it was terribly lonely at home. So much so that he wanted to call her a couple of times. Loneliness was all that he had. Not everyone can endure such companionship. Christina woke up when it was around 9 a.m. on the clock. She had breakfast. Antonio had left her sandwiches with fried eggs. Soon the phone rang. "Did you have a breakfast?" he asked. "Yes." "Get dressed, take all the documents, and come to my clinic. We have good doctors here, and you'll be well taken care of." Christina had only been to the doctor once before all this. She found out she was pregnant when Lorenzo had already passed away. There were the funeral, then 3 days, then 9 days. Not long ago, it had been 40 days. She had only been to the doctor on the day she met Antonio. They did an ultrasound and confirmed her pregnancy with multiple fetuses and ordered her to bring her documents. And now Antonio had dropped this on her, and then the roof of her house collapsed. Of course, it was very important to get all the tests done. She took everything she had in terms of documents, made her way to the luxurious medical center, and called Antonio. The security guard at the entrance looked at her suspiciously. She wasn't dressed as if she were there to receive treatment. But soon Antonio came to meet her. "There she is," he smiled. Christina noticed that the white coat suited him very well. "Claudio, this is Christina," he addressed the guard. "She's a very close person to me. Always let her in," he said to him very firmly. The guard nodded. Unlike Antonio, he had never served in the army. He paid the bribe to the right people and now propped up the door of an elite clinic and also looked down on everyone. Antonio didn't like him. And everyone here was afraid of Antonio. Everyone knew he had been to war. He had a strong character. Christina was seen by paid specialist doctors. Of course, everything was free for colleagues. Many of the ladies working there had heard about the handsome surgeon's divorce and wanted to seduce him with all their might. But Antonio was not ready for relationships yet. "Is this your wife?" asked the young nurse when Antonio left Christina in the women's consultation room. "She is the wife of my comrade. He died in the war," Antonio said, so as not to let rumors spread that Christina was his lover who accidentally got pregnant. They could think even worse and then tell it to everyone as it was the truth. The nurse sympathetically nodded and left to spread rumors around the hospital. An hour later, Christina found Antonio in the cafeteria. Antonio, I'm done for today. I'm going home. What should I cook for lunch? Leave it, there's nothing you need to do. I'll do it myself. Come here. Antonio sat her down at the table and brought her a salad. Christina ate the salad. Honestly, she was really hungry. Antonio knew that pregnant women are always hungry. I'm not sick, I'm pregnant. So I'll clean and cook in the house while I live with you. That will be my rent. Is that okay? She asked. Antonio agreed. Christina found a small job for herself. She answered calls in the morning, telling clients of a cosmetic company about their products and services. She also managed to clean the house, do laundry, and iron clothes. For the first time, Antonio felt he was really married. Elena didn't like doing housework, and the kitchen wasn't always tidy. Antonio had to wash the dishes. Elena worked only 4 days a week, 5 hours a day, but still got tired. She said she didn't like her job as a coach and still regretted having to leave sports. She wasn't interested in how his day went, only talking about herself. Antonio noticed her selfishness from the beginning of their relationship, but he liked it back then. She seemed like a capricious princess, but at the same time, strong and determined. Sports require these qualities, and Elena undoubtedly had them. However, comparing her to Christina, Antonio realized that he was young and foolish when he chose his wife. She didn't cook dinner or give her husband the attention he deserved. She wasn't faithful, as it turned out, while Christina had all these qualities. And he understood that Lorenzo was much wiser than him. 2 months later, Christina and Antonio entered the hospital building together. They talked sweetly as if they were a couple. Everyone around them looked at them and thought that maybe they were husband and wife. Everyone except the staff who knew what was going on. Are you ready? Do you really want to know the gender of our future children? Asked Antonio. Of course. I'm dying of curiosity. Plus, we'll need to buy clothes. Lorenzo's mom offered to give us some things from her own babies, Christina replied. We'll definitely do that. But don't worry, we'll buy everything we need. When it came to financial matters, Christina was extremely nervous, and Antonio was afraid she wouldn't let him help. They had a million conversations about it. And why couldn't all women be as modest as Christina? Antonio felt like she was the only one who was doing things right and wasn't greedy. She was shy about taking money for her own needs. Her part-time job didn't pay much, but she spent all the money on shared expenses. She bought food and paid for electricity. She became a real homemaker. But Antonio was also uncomfortable that she had taken everything upon herself. He began to wean her from doing the heavy housework. He forbid her from washing the floors and cleaning the windows. Christina was not at all afraid of heights. And once, Antonio saw the girl half hanging out of the 8th floor window, and everything inside him shrunk and cooled. Trying not to scare her, Antonio quietly approached her, held onto her hand and waist more tightly, and pulled her inside. What's wrong with you? I didn't finish cleaning the corner. Christina protested. You'll give me a heart attack. I swear. Are you out of your mind? You're pregnant with 2 children. Where are you climbing out? Antonio was really scared, but his shouts didn't faze Christina. Don't worry. I'm not afraid of heights. But my children are inside me. I held on tight with my feet here. And the windows need to be cleaned somehow. You cleaned them last time. Never, it seems, said Christina. Antonio had to clean the corner on the outside himself so that Christina wouldn't climb up again. Without realizing it, they instantly found a common language. It turned out that Christina was knowledgeable in medicine, with many stories told to her by Lorenzo. Like Antonio, she often thought about who we are and why we're in this world, and what happens after. They could talk for hours on such topics, not realizing that it was time to sleep. Together, they visited Lorenzo's foster parents. They were broken and depressed. The door was opened by a young boy, still in school. And upon entering, they saw an exact copy of the boy in a wheelchair. Antonio examined the boy and read his medical card. It turned out that Lorenzo didn't turn to his friend for help because everything happened in the capital during a competition. The twins were involved in acrobatics, traveling to different cities for performances. They showed off tricks and earned money. They wanted to become stunt performers. Miguel was lucky, and he received a gold medal, while Vito ended up in a wheelchair. The operation was urgent and was done for free. The same clinic offered to do another one. The doctor was touched by their family's tragedy, as he also had a twin brother, and he did everything cheaper, out of turn, but it still cost a lot of money. In the end, everything was restored. Vito could already stand on his own, but without special procedures, it was more difficult, painful, and longer. Antonio then bought him 2 expensive exercise machines so that the boy could exercise and recover at home. He also bought expensive medication necessary for his recovery. To do this, he contacted the doctor who performed the operation and consulted with him. The trip was difficult because photos of Lorenzo also hung on the walls of their home. Antonio still couldn't fully believe what had happened. When Lorenzo's foster mother saw them off, she whispered to Antonio, "Christina is a very good girl, marry her." He would have wanted that. You know, he would have said that he would only trust you to raise his children and take care of his wife. Antonio shook his head, embarrassed, and said they were just friends, that there was nothing between them. But even then, he caught himself thinking that he couldn't imagine living without her now. Even years spent with his wife had not had such an effect as a few weeks with this woman. Christina walked into the room. Antonio was supposed to wait for her in the hallway, but he couldn't wait and also entered. "Natalia, can I stay here too? I'm so interested." "We even argued about it," he said to his colleague. She nodded. "And what did you argue about? Boys or girls?" she asked with a smile. "Antonio says I'm carrying 2 girls. Daughters. And I think one of them is definitely a boy." "Or both," Christina replied, settling on the couch. Cold but pleasantly scented gel was applied to her stomach and the procedure began. Antonio stood next to her, holding her hand, as if he were her husband. "Congratulations, Antonio, you won. It's girls. Of course, sometimes we make mistakes, but I haven't made any yet. You'll have 2 identical girls." Antonio laughed happily. Then, Christina had to give blood for analysis, and she remained with the doctors for some time. By lunchtime, her scheduled doctor visit was over, and Antonio drove her home during his lunch break. "How did you know we were having girls?" Christina asked. "I didn't know. I just remember Lorenzo always saying he wanted 2 daughters. And I said I wanted sons. When we were at war, we loved to dream about a bright future. It made it easier to survive. We thought about how great it would be to live, to be loved and respected. These dreams allowed us to come back home alive." 3 more months had passed. The situation had changed and settled in. Antonio felt as if these children were his. He worried about Christina as if she were his wife and understood that he would not worry as much about any other woman. He dreamed of having children, but his ex-wife kept postponing and finding excuses. They hadn't traveled enough yet. She couldn't quit her job as a coach now. She had to help her protege win an Olympic medal. She said she couldn't do it herself, so she wanted to feel it as a coach. Christina couldn't stand on her feet for so long anymore. Antonio took on some of her work. He called her constantly, asking what she wanted. Together, they went through a small bout of morning sickness, mood swings, and food cravings. They lay in bed together, thinking about how Lorenzo would want to name their girls. Now, with only 2 months left until the birth, Antonio was constantly worried. Everyone knows that twins are born a little earlier than the due date. It's just the way it is. It could happen at any moment. Antonio suggested that Christina go to the hospital early, but she refused. A wonderful doctor, the head of the women's clinic at their medical center, was supposed to deliver the baby. Antonio arranged it and said that money was not a problem. Another problem that plagued Antonio was his feelings for Christina. He realized he loved her. But it was embarrassing, she was his friend's widow. She should be sacred to him, like a mother. It should have been a taboo. And he got stuck, it was scary. He loved absolutely everything about her, her eyes, lips, eyelashes, her hands, her laughter, her grumbling, and her character. To sort himself out, he went first to Lorenzo's adoptive mother and talked to her. She smiled and said she blessed him on behalf of her son. She said Lorenzo was definitely not one of those who would ask his wife to be a widow forever and his friend to give up his own love. But it didn't help quell the feeling of shame inside. Then Antonio went to the cemetery. That's how it is, my friend. I thought I would be a brother to her, but it turned out that breathing without her is painful. If you were alive, you would have punched me in the face. And you would have done it right. You know, I got drunk last week. And I broke my hand. Because I don't understand what to do in this situation. I shouldn't. I feel like an idiot. But, you see, I can't control it. And I don't know what to do. Christina needs my help. I won't abandon her. I have decided this. I won't do anything. Not for anything. She herself is faithful to you. She would probably hate me if I confessed to her. Although, sometimes I feel like she looks at me differently. Not like in the beginning. Little brother, rest in peace. I won't touch her. She is your wife. I will only be a friend. Just taking care of her. But if she develops feelings for me, then I don't know what to do. I don't know. Antonio stood on the cemetery in the village for a long time, and when he started to leave, he saw a funeral procession. The priest was among the relatives in the crowd. He conducted the ritual, and Antonio waited for him in the car. Excuse me, can I take a moment with you? He addressed the clergyman. The priest willingly stopped. Antonio briefly told the priest his story. I fell in love with her. And I'm ashamed. How do I get rid of this feeling? It's a sin. There is no sin. Love is given to us by God. It's too early for a widow to remarry, she needs to wait at least a year. But in her case, an exception can be made. You have the wrong idea. Understand, your friend has passed away. He is no longer among the living. He won't be able to use his clothes anymore, he won't be able to take care of his wife. But she's alive. She has children. And you're alive, you're his friend. Tell me, if he were alive, wouldn't he give you what he couldn't use anymore, but what you needed? He would give me anything. But a woman is not a thing. It's different. If he were alive, I wouldn't even dare to look at her. I had pure intentions. Her house was destroyed, and I took her in. I'm divorced. She's a widow. We just lived together, it was convenient and safe for her. And I wanted to take care of her, she carries my friend's children under her heart. And now everything is mixed up inside me. I saw her from a different side. I think she's my soulmate. We're so alike. And I realized why Lorenzo chose her. But do I have the right? You have the right. You didn't have to help, but you did. In gratitude, the Lord rewarded you, gave you a family. I don't think you've realized that yet. You just need to talk to her about everything. Your friend would have approved of this. I think he would have wanted this. After all, he trusted you. If you were in his place, wouldn't you have encouraged his union with his widow? Everything just happened so fast. It's not for us to judge. Everything happens as it should be. I think your responsibility and selflessness have brought you happiness. You may not have found a family through marriage, but you found it by saving your friend's widow. It's God's providence. Don't be ashamed. Talk to the widow. You need to figure everything out. If you had stolen your friend's girlfriend, it would have been a sin. But this is completely different. That's just how life turned out. After listening to the priest, Antonio gathered his courage and decided to talk to Christina. He came home with a bouquet of flowers. His conscience was still gnawing at him, and he was terrified. What if she wasn't ready? What if he scared her off? He thought it all over as he made his way home with the flowers. As usual, he opened the door with his key. Silence. He walked through the rooms. No one was there. He went to the kitchen, where Elena was sitting with her back to him, drinking coffee from a mug. Elena? What are you doing here? And where's Christina? Asked Antonio. I didn't think you'd bring someone home so quickly. We've only been divorced for 6 months, and she's already pregnant and swears the kids aren't yours. So it's not just me who cheated on you, right? Elena was in her element. She had spent her whole childhood in the gym and her entire life competing. She was skilled at putting her opponents in the dirt. I asked where Christina is, growled Antonio. Elena was scared. He never used to talk to her like that. She left. How should I know? I'm not following your women. You know, I came here to make peace. I thought you missed me too. I realized I don't love David. I love you. I was wrong. I'm ready to atone for my sin. Elena approached him and placed her hand on his shoulder, hinting unambiguously that she was ready to atone for her sins in bed. Antonio stood still, afraid to move. He was petrified with fear. What had this fool told her? Where would Christina go? Where could he find her? Elena interpreted this pause as a sign that Antonio was willing to punish her and quickly unbuttoned his shirt. Antonio snapped out of his trance and looked at her. Elena, get out of here, and if you come back again, I'll call the police, Antonio said quietly, starting to search for his mobile phone. Elena still stood next to him, feeling a bit lost. She didn't know whether to continue her attempt or to lift her nose and leave. She didn't want to give up. But Antonio could be a real psycho when his feelings were hurt. The operator's voice came through the phone. The subscriber is not available now. Please call back later. Elena, when did Christina leave? Antonio asked. An hour ago. I didn't kick her out. Who is she anyway? Can you explain it to me? She asked arrogantly. Antonio took her by the elbow and led her to the door. His ex-wife resisted, but it was futile. He gently pushed her out the door. A second later, he threw out her purse. Asshole! Came a voice from behind the door. Antonio was not in the mood for Elena. He called and called, but she didn't answer. Then he went outside. Elena had already left in her white car. He asked an old lady near the entrance, and she said that a crying pregnant woman had passed by a couple of hours ago. Antonio called the police, and they told him to wait. So he personally went to the nearest station. Do you understand that she's pregnant? She went through the woods. I found witnesses. Help me find her, or I'll tear your department apart. He shouted. You'll end up in jail. The chief yelled back. Antonio was desperate. What should he do? He sat down and grabbed his head. Listen, I understand everything. You had a fight. Your wife is pregnant and missing. It happens. She'll be found. The policeman tried to persuade him. She's the wife of my fellow soldier. We were in the war together. He died, and I'm looking after her. I didn't fight with her. My ex-wife came and said all sorts of things to her. And Christina, she left. Probably she went home. I suspect she went to look for a ride to the village. She lived there. She's been gone for 4 hours already, Antonio explained. The department head sighed. You were in the war together, you say? He asked. Antonio nodded. Pedro, take the car with Victor, check the road and the forest near the village. Help find the woman. What does she look like? What was she wearing? The policeman instructed. The police officer was touched by Antonio's story and helped him, but by evening, the search yielded no results. Antonio was in the village, asking neighbors, going into almost every house. He called all the nearby hospitals and maternity homes. The police stopped the search until the morning, and he went to the store for a flashlight and went into the woods alone. It was quiet, dark. You could hear his footsteps, the crunch of twigs under his feet, and the sounds of an owl. "Christina!" he shouted, venturing deeper into the woods. He had his phone with him and kept dialing, but the response was always the same, unavailable. This night was one of the scariest and longest in his life. Closer to dawn, when it was still dark but the eastern sky was beginning to brighten, he thought he heard a man's voice. "Over here! Over here!" Antonio thought it was his imagination. But then it happened again. He remembered Lorenzo calling out to him once before, saying those same words. "Over here! Over here!" Then, another cry came from the woods. "Antonio!" Lorenzo shouted. Antonio didn't understand what was happening. Maybe he was asleep? Or was it a hallucination? But he could clearly hear Lorenzo's voice. Antonio looked around and realized he was lost. "Where are you, buddy?" he asked softly, repeating the words he had used to respond to his friend's cry back in the hot zone. And then he heard the answer, as if it were happening all over again. Only this time, there were no gunshots. "I'm here. Over here, buddy. Hurry." Antonio followed the voice, knowing inside that Lorenzo was no longer alive. But he trusted him then and he trusted him now. And he walked in a completely different direction. After 15 minutes, he emerged from the woods. There, by the last trees, he found Christina. She was alone in a top. 2 babies were wrapped in a jacket. "Oh my God! What are you doing here?" Antonio rushed towards her. She was covered in blood, with trembling hands, unable to remember herself due to fatigue and experience. Antonio looked at the babies. "I cut the umbilical cord with a splinter," she whispered, almost fainting. The network wasn't working, that's why they couldn't contact her. Antonio called emergency services and half an hour later they were taken to the nearest hospital. From there, Christina was sent to the medical center where Antonio worked and the children were taken for examination. Antonio was also examined. He left his wallet in the car and only had his phone with him. He waited for the car to be returned and rushed to the hospital. It was 7 in the morning when Antonio entered the clinic. "Where are you going?" asked the head of the prenatal clinic. "To see her." "How is she?" "How are the children?" "The 2 girls are fine, they are feeling good about themselves." "And clean yourself up. You may work here and be in the military, but I won't let you enter the room looking like that," said the doctor seriously. Antonio rushed to the showers, cleaned up, put on a gown, and changed into clothes he had in his locker. Christina was asleep when he entered the room. The children were nearby, in separate cribs, also asleep. She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Sorry for making you run all night in the woods. And for giving birth there. And for leaving. I was lost. Your ex-wife said you wanted to reconcile with her and I was getting in the way. Is that true?" She whispered. "No. That's a lie. I kicked her out when I arrived. I didn't know she would come. I changed the locks. Why did you let her in at all?" "I don't know, she just walked in herself." "Sounds like her. The doctors say everything is good with you. So, how was your night yesterday?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Christina smiled. "Great. Fresh air, mosquitoes the size of horses, and me, giving birth." Antonio chuckled silently. He missed their sarcastic banter. He kissed her cheek and left. He returned in the evening with a bouquet of flowers and Christina was feeding the babies. Milk hadn't come yet, but they were hungry. He approached and helped. "Have you decided how to name them?" Antonio asked. Maybe we should name one of the girls Lorenza? I didn't tell you. Do you know how Lorenzo wanted to name his daughters? Christina nodded questioningly. He wanted to name one Angela and the other Felicia. He liked those names. Then it's probably Angela. And this one is Felicia. Right? Agreed. Angela was born first? Yes. Great. They look the same. How do you distinguish them? Antonio asked, holding a bottle for one of the babies. Christina pointed to the tag on their leg. She wrote the number 1 and 2 with a pen on each tag. Can you who is who without the tag? He asked. Angela is slightly bigger, and she has a mosquito bite on her entire leg. She got bitten while I was giving birth to Felicia. Antonio looked at the girls and saw his friend's features in them. You know, I heard Lorenzo's voice then, in the woods. I had those hallucinations again. It was like he was shouting at me from the other side. I only found you because of those shouts. Christina looked at him. I didn't hear anything. I wonder if he was there. Did he see me, see our children? Maybe he's standing here with us right now, smiling? Antonio didn't know what to say. The conversation about his feelings was postponed again. 7 more months have passed. Antonio and Christina stood at Lorenzo's grave. There was now a beautiful monument in its place. The twins stayed in the car with Lorenzo's foster mother watching over them. The twins also came with them. Vito had a crutch, but it was a big improvement for him. No more wheelchair, he could now walk to the car on his own. Antonio still hadn't told Christina about his feelings, and he couldn't come up with a better way than doing it on the first anniversary of Lorenzo's death. After visiting the cemetery with Lorenzo's foster family, Antonio and Christina were finally alone. The twins were already asleep. You know, I want to tell you the whole truth. Everything as it is. And Lorenzo is a witness, I'm not lying, Antonio said. Christina looked at him with surprise. When I brought you home, I wanted to be an older brother to you. I thought we would only have a friendly relationship. As if we were relatives. But the more I got to know you, the more I realized that I was falling in love. And I know how inappropriate this all is now. I talked to the priest about it, and he said there was no sin in it. My conscience is tormenting me. I feel like I'm doing something wrong. I'm confused. If you don't have feelings for me, then let everything be as it is now. I'm happy to be with you in any status. But if you feel something for me too, maybe we could try dating, or whatever you call it when you've been living with someone for almost a year. Christina nervously chuckled and stared at the floor. It was awkward. But she couldn't lie to him or to herself. Everything needed to be clarified. She would never have started this conversation herself. She wouldn't have found the words. But since everything she felt was mutual, it was worth laying all the cards on the table. The harm from lying would be greater than from telling the truth. And the truth, it was just that, the truth. Why hide it when they were no longer 15 years old? I have feelings for you too. But it's somehow wrong. On the other hand, Lorenzo couldn't have found a better man to be a father to our girls than you. Isn't that what you want? Christina was also at a loss. She had long understood that she was drawn to Antonio. She liked his rugged care, the fact that they had a million topics to talk about. She had never spoken so candidly with Lorenzo. With Lorenzo they argued, but with Antonio, they never did. Unintentionally, she compared them and realized that if she had met Antonio and Lorenzo earlier, she would have chosen Antonio. That's how it seemed to her now. But her feelings for her late husband had not gone away, and her grief had not disappeared either. And the shame that she had found a replacement for him so quickly also never left Christina for a second. I propose only serious relationships. No kissing in the stairwell. We can legalize our marriage. I will provide paternity for the girls. No. Lorenzo will be their father. Let them have his last name. Let them have a double last name, though. You know, any option that you think is right. They couldn't shake off their shyness for a long time. It all started like with teenagers. Awkward touches, secret glances. As if they were breaking 100,000 rules. But 2 years later, Christina and Antonio were expecting a child again. This time they had a boy, whom they named Lorenzo by mutual decision. The girls went to kindergarten. The older they got, the more they resembled their father. He wasn't there, but the girls even inherited his way of speaking. Christina and Antonio looked at them and saw him in them. His eyes, his features, his laughter, his smile. They knew everything from childhood. You have two daddies. Your real dad died in training, he was a soldier. His photo will always hang on our wall. And your adoptive dad, Antonio, my husband. He's also your dad. He has loved you from birth.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.